Hello, everybody. Welcome to our fourth webinar in our supply chain series. We'll give everybody a second to get settled in. My name is David Carrick. I'm the Associate Director of the Industrial Extension and in charge of our supply chain effort here. For those of you that have been with us through all four of these, welcome back. For those of you who may be joining for the first time, welcome. As the state's only affiliate to the MEP National Network, we've been working on a 2-year program to understand and study supply chain in the state. And as part of that, we brought in Orchard Street Solutions. Mr. Adam Lowe will have with us today to do a webinar on supply chain. A lot of what we're finding is not so much looking for supply chains, but how to fit and how to work in other supply chains, how to get involved in them. Another part of this effort has been supplier scouting, where if you're looking to find a supplier for something, maybe you only have one supplier or prices have gone up or stuff that you're buying overseas you want to reshore. We have a free program that we can connect with our colleagues in all 51 MEP centers across the country to help find those products for you. So if you have any questions about that, reach out to me or drop your information in the chat, and I'll make sure I get in touch with you. Before I turn it over to Adam, just so like I said, he's the owner of Orchard Street Solutions. It's a management, operations, and strategy consulting firm in Baltimore. Although, as I say every week, he's a West Virginia boy at heart, so we won't hold that against him. He earned his MBA from WVU and has more than 15 years of leadership experience in several industries, including manufacturing, hospitality, and the Marine Corps. Most recently, he's worked for one of the world's chief defense contractors, managing several departments from global supply chain, sell operations and talent strategy to manufacturing operations, consumables, material groups, outsourcing. It pretty much sounds like he ran the whole show. A lot of experience. So throughout his career, Adam's been his people-oriented process, excuse me, his people-oriented process-focused leadership approach has positioned him to be selected for multiple large-scale projects, including team building, stabilization, growth, development, strategic efforts. His process improvement strategies and sound logistic planning has led to many team organizations and lasting success. Um, Definitely a jack of all trades, and with looking at the small, medium-sized manufacturers we work with in the state, that's exactly what we work with. So we thought he'd be a good fit for this. Adam, I'll stop babbling about your profile and hand it over.
Thanks, Dave. Appreciate it. And that profile makes me sound way cooler than I actually am. But I do kind of take the jack of all trades concept and I wear that as a badge of pride. So all y'all who are sitting on the call who are jacks of all trades, you're in good company with myself today. I like that. I think it's a good perspective to have a lot of different perspectives, to continue to learn in a lot of different ways. So that's served me well. And hopefully it'll serve you all well today as we expand into our fourth iteration of the series this week. We're going to be talking, and I'll go ahead and advance. We're going to be talking about maintaining your supply chain focus system into the future. So we'll do a bit of a review. We'll talk about some systems-based operations framework. We'll talk about maintaining your system of systems. We did address that last week. We're going to go a little bit more in depth, and we're going to angle it a little bit more into the digital space, starting to build up those frameworks of digitization, which is kind of that next step forward. If you're not there yet, it's totally fine. Want to be laying some foundations for you to get there, and then doing some keeping an eye on technology. This is more of a futuristic version of what you might see coming down the pipe for manufacturing everywhere, really. So we'll go into depth there. We were just talking a little bit about artificial intelligence. I am going to touch on that pretty heavily. So and hopefully make it really more practical, take away some of the maybe the luster, the magic behind it, and talk a little bit more about how you can be thinking about artificial intelligence in your specific focus areas. So without further ado, we'll go ahead and push on forward into the review. So if you've been here over the last 3 sessions, this will be old hat for you. I won't go into detail on any of them. All of the webinars will be online. I believe they've already posted them, so you can feel free to jump back in, check those out. Session 1 was kind of spurring off of what we did last year in our Supply Chain 101 course. It was a Supply Chain 101 was a very, very wide view of supply chain, just getting people familiar with the terminology and what you might hear in supply chain and those type of things. That was last year. This year, we kind of narrowed it down from that really wide scope of all the links in the chain to your specific link, which is your factory, your operation. So we focused very heavily on that in the first session, talking about what the operation might look like, the different elements of your operation, all that good stuff. Then we leveraged that information into session number 2, and we focused internally on your operation, supply chain, as well as manufacturing operations, business operations, all those good things that make your business go, and how those are linked together. Really focusing heavily on supply chain not being a separate element, not being its own stovepiped organization, but it's very, very integral to all of your operation overall within your manufacturing group, your business operations, whatever it may be. Integrating that thought process and integrating those goals and creating that RACI framework. We talked about that. If you don't know what a RACI is, check out that session number 2. Learn a little bit about RACI and how you can set up your organization to work really well together across different departments, who does what and how you do it and all that good stuff. So after that, then we moved into an external view of supply chain. So it's more of those supply chain relations, or that supplier relationship that you might have, reaching out into your supplier base and learning how to qualify certain suppliers as being, maybe your integral suppliers, your key suppliers, as well as maybe your general suppliers, and those different types of relationships, what that might look like, some techniques and tips on both of those, session 2 and session 3, some kind of best practice tips. But one of the things I do want to say, and I say it, I think hopefully in every recording, is it's very much a thought process operation here, a thought process exercise to get you thinking in these different terms, thinking in how your organization looks, the systems that you have in place or don't have in place. Hopefully you will after this session. But thinking about your operation in those terms of how you look at different things and look for those improvements, and it's less tailored to your individual operation. Another thing I like to say is I'm not involved with your contracts. I'm not involved with your legal. I don't know all of those different frameworks that you have in place. So always listen for the different maybe inconsistencies that might pop up, and just say, hey, we can't do that here because of X, Y, and Z in our contract, or we might not be able to do this certain thing because of the way that we have our regulations through the government, or whatever that might be. Really, it's just a lot of best practices that I found over the years, whether it be in the Marine Corps as far as operations and organization, or it's manufacturing operations that I've done in the past. And so so really thinking through your operation in terms of what you have there in front of you, and then taking the frameworks and angling those, looking for those, maybe those gaps, or where you can apply these different systems thinking or operations thinking in your own organization. So without further ado, let's go ahead and pop right into the systems-based operations framework. So I won't go into extreme depth here, because we did in the last session talk about the system of systems framework, but I will reiterate, just because it's moving forward in the world, especially as we digitize, having a pretty firm understanding of the different systems you have in place, as well as the different processes and documentation for those systems, is going to be important, because that will be the base level. Especially those digital frameworks and those digital systems, will be what you can leverage into some of the new tools that we're going to talk about in the last few slides. So, what is a systems-based approach? It's as simple as that. It's being able to call out on paper, in a process, how things work. Simple as that. So, and it's in kind of a juxtaposed to a person or based operation. So you have, let's say, a superstar who does everything for you. They've got all these things up in their brain, and how they make things work, and how the sausage is made, and they do it all. And then that person wins the lottery, they walk away. All of those systems go out the door. All those processes go out the door. All of those connections and those workflows and things go out the door. So what I often encourage is looking for ways to extract that information and put it into a document, looking for ways to put that into a map, a process map or process flow, just so that you can, again, not lose that information. It puts you in a bond if that person wants to promote, or you want to promote that person perhaps, or whatever. When you're operating with a very people focused, and I know it's easy to do, especially as you grow, smaller operations growing into larger, you can have that key personnel being one of 2, one of 3 people that might start out your shop. Next thing you know, you get some more contracts, you get some more purchases, you get some more orders and things like that. You need more people. And the next thing you know, we've just always kind of done it this way, and it's working really well. This person just knows everything, and they know how to do it. Getting that out of them, and it's something we'll go into in the next slide as well, and finding how you can put that into a document or a system, and then develop systems off of that. And again, in last session, I talked about creating simple systems, simple mindset, easy to understand at the very base level, so that as you build your system of systems, you can go back and do your evaluations and determine which levers you've pulled within those systems to make certain outcomes, so that you can fix them when they go wrong. That's another big point that I like to make about a system of systems, is that it makes it very much more possible and easier to go back into a system of systems when it's not a personnel based, because you might have somebody who's just really good at communicating in a with a vendor, let's say, and that's just a natural part of who they are, and they've kept really good vendor relations, and a byproduct of that is just knowing the people they're talking to. Maybe their natural tendency is to, to have a little bit of chit chat at the beginning of their meetings. Well, if you can actually extract that and say, what do your meetings look like? You can start to pull that into hey, this company doesn't like chit chat. They want to go right into the meat and potatoes. They want to know. Or this other company, we want to talk about this, and they like this, and they're big WVU fans, and that's who we want, right? That's that's who we want to bring onto the table, right? So if you know those things about them, a quick documentation so that you can pass that along to the next person that's going to be that vendor manager. Those are the types of things that can happen within a systems framework, and a systems of systems, and a documented systems framework, that you might not even think about. It might just be, well, that's interpersonal. That's not really part of the business. However, when you're talking about those really good supplier relationships, it is part of the business, and keeping up those good supplier relationships and vendor relationships, it's a big part of what that might look like. And so having the ability to recognize that system, those processes that are in place, and document them. Sorry, I've got something in my eye. Documenting them is a really good framework for being able to say, all right, now this person's leaving. We promoted them. They're doing fantastic. Let's bring in someone else. Their replacement comes in. They've got a really solid framework to work off of. Work instructions all the way down to, those documented relationships, and who they need to talk to, what they need to ask about, and all that good stuff. So that's kind of what we're talking about here when we're thinking about systems thinking and systems of systems thinking. Next, okay, now this is when it gets a little bit more into the digital framework, and a little bit more of like that next step from where we were last week, coming off of that system of systems framework explanation just now, into how do we build that into your operations framework. Connection is a big point. Again, I've been talking about that in the last few sessions, connecting your digital framework with your physical framework, allowing these sources, manufacturing, distribution, all those folks that make the business go, being connected. I talked a little bit about a common workspace if you have a digital footprint. Again, you might not have that. Something very simple that I like to at least say, hey, maybe you want to explore is Microsoft Teams. It's just an example of like a digital footprint, or a digital like landing zone for connectivity for your groups. When you play around with it, you'll see, oh, I can keep my digital files on here, and anybody can access them, or I can block certain areas off where maybe it's only a global supply chain, section, or maybe it's only a manufacturing section of that, because there might be some specific items that you're working on for metrics or whatever, that you don't really need everyone to see because it's working items, and you don't want them to mess with. For sure, you can lock them down, but that's kind of a digital framework, and then you can link those things together within that integrated framework. So again, that's laying a digital foundation is basically where we're going at with this slide. So standardizing processes, again, I think that this is pretty self-explanatory based on what we've been discussing. I do know that that Dave's team can definitely help with this. If you say, we'd really like to get better at standardizing, at reducing waste, at making our operation run more smoothly, I would say a plug for him and his team. They can definitely help with this element of your operation, as well as when you start to get that thinking going through within your, let's say, your manufacturing group, your supply chain group, or if it's a person that wears a supply chain hat, as well as 20 other hats, as we often do. But your supply chain group can also adopt a lot of that framework for, how do we stay lean and mean? How do we make sure our processes are documented? How do we integrate together digitally and just in person? All of those good things. How do we document, what we're doing? That's kind of the standardization piece. I would give a little bit of a caveat here, though, for the standardization, and say that sometimes standardizing can mean a strict framework. It doesn't always have to mean that, or you can build in flexibility within that standardized process. So you can have a best practice. 99% of things should work this way. I often find it's nice to be able to have a little bit of breath there on the corner. But historically speaking, when I've seen the best operations that I've been a part of have had a lane for the expedite lane, or a lane for, okay, when something goes wrong, what are the protocol and how do we address that issue? How do we have solutions that are built into our standardized processes? So it's just something to think about as you're building those standardized processes. Do you need a kind of an off lane, right? And how we deal with certain things. It often comes up. I like to mention it. And then finally, using technology. I spoke a little bit about that with the Microsoft Teams as a digital footprint or digital framework for collective use. But this can also mean agentic AI or AI tools in general. I'm going to go into that a lot. I have to pull myself back at this point because I want to go into it right now, but I'll wait for the last 3 slides to talk about AI, ERP systems, enterprise resource, MRP, manufacturing resource systems, and then SCM, like supply chain management systems too. So something to think about. They're out there. You can research those terms if you're like, yeah, you know what, we're at the point where I think we need a little bit more robust tool, technology, some sort of something that will help us, with our purchase orders, make them a little bit more clean, because we're kind of using a more wonky system, or maybe we're only using like Microsoft Office to do that, which is totally fine, by the way. Not knocking any of that either. Older, I won't say older, but standardized processes that use Microsoft Office, if it was working for you, there's no major need to change. What I'd usually march towards is that framework of ideology of saying, use what you got, continue to learn, continue to grow, continue to think forward about what might work better, work just as good, but maybe it's a little bit more open, a little bit more, you can pull data a little bit more cleanly. And I will mention data a lot. You'll hear that probably a lot today, just because your digital or your data framework. I'm very big on a system of developing a system of making your decisions based off of your data. If you're not collecting it, it makes it really hard to make systems based off of data, or make decisions, I'm sorry, make based off of your data. So having a collective system, and it can be as simple as an Excel document that tracks your incoming purchase or your incoming material, where it's going, where it came from, what date it got here, some key pieces of information, setting it at a common location, and then learning how to use pivot tables to get the best out of your data. You know what? How do you evaluate your vendors? I mentioned that a lot on the last call. How do you evaluate your vendors based on their deliveries, or based on their cost, or based on, a lot of different factors? All of that can be built, and all of those solutions can come from a good digital footprint, a good data set at the bottom level, a database, if you have it, wherever you are in your stages. If you're a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 person shop, or you got 200 or 300 people, 500 people in your operation, whatever that might look like, having some sort of database or digital framework is kind of like the next step into the future, and that will dovetail in very nicely for that handshake with your automated AIs, your robotics technology that we'll talk about, and things like that. So this is kind of just a championing that digital baseline framework at the beginning of your operation, or at least starting to consider it, starting to think through. If you're not there yet, it's totally fine. Just starting to think through what it might look like for your operation. So going a little further into the systems framework. So I'm not going to hit these super heavily. I would encourage just like kind of reading through the bullets. I'm going to speak to them in generalities because I do want to get to the last 3 slides. And in practice, I've gone a little long, as those of you who've been with us for the ride know I can do. So yeah, I would encourage you just to kind of read the headlines there, read the bullets, and I'll hit them just with the concepts that are there. So the first one is ensuring interoperability across systems. And this is kind of an expansion on what I was just talking about. And this talks, speaking to your specifically to your global supply chain or your supply chain systems, but also, as we've talked about a lot, those are all likely to be integrated with your operation in the future state or current state. Your manufacturing operation being able to speak to your supply chain operation is a really good communications channel. There's lots of information that can come off of the floor that can help your folks who are wearing that supply chain hat. That's that kind of mentality of then feeding that information back out to your vendors to have the most streamlined and smooth, efficient system possible. This is like the next step further, and it's using your digital footprint and your digital connectivity, your information systems, your IT to help you with that, and even automated a lot of that. Now, you know, how far ahead we can go with this, especially because of AI, is insane these days. But beginning, if you're not at that stage yet, just beginning to think through how these handshakes can work and how you can become connected and how you can get these systems working across your global network. Let's say you go on vacation to Porto, Portugal, and you want to spend some time by the Douro River. And you're sitting there, you've got your computer, you can pop it up. There's many systems now, many frameworks for systems will allow you to jump right into your manufacturing operations, as well as how your vendors are delivering. If you need information or emails sent out from your location, you can do it all from one spot. And it's using those interconnected devices that will give you that information. It'll dump it into one set, and that'll help you view that from really any location, whether you be sitting in an office building or wherever you are. Really nice to have to make those quick decisions. And again, it's that database, those digital solutions that you might be looking for. Again, it creates that opportunity to real-time monitor. Next kind of headline there is knowledge retention and process documentation. Again, oh boy, I could do a whole series on just processes, just systems, just documentation. I'm not going to beat the dead horse because you probably heard me if you were here last week, I know you got it. If you were here the week before, you got it then. And, so I won't make you do it a third week in a row. But I am very, again, big on the documentation and processes, just because it gives you the opportunity, just from a managerial perspective, let's say, it gives you the opportunity to go through as a manager, instead of pointing at a human and saying, why did you fail at this? You get to point off, if you have a systems based and a documented based, system, you can point to its system. And so it takes some of that personal connection out of it, maybe, that just helps. And that's just a practical element of having a system that is in documentation. And it's something that you can point to on paper and say, this is, we're all here around this table, not pointing at you as a person. We're pointing at the system. We're pointing at this, and we're saying this system just seems wonky. It looks like there's some sand in these gears. How do we fix this system where it failed? Which might help you with that interpersonal relation piece of management. And that, again, that's just one piece that can help. Really, though, documenting the systems, the big help there is being able to point to those levers that you're pulling downstream and saying, what is it that we did here that resulted in Y? We needed it to result in Z, and being able to dig through and look at it, find it in the system, do the deep dive, do the root cause analysis, and then get into that solution, find that gap. And so that's why I'm a big proponent of that. Again, I said I wasn't going to beat the dead horse, but I did it anyway. All right. The next one, we'll talk about embedding resilience into your framework. And the idea behind this one, resilience, you can probably change that, or at least kind of handshake it with the idea of a maintenance system. I'll preach on that more than I will even the last bullet points that I was talking about, is maintenance. Developing a system of maintenance while you're developing your overall system as a hand-in-hand item is extremely important, because then you're starting to plan for logistics, and you're not just planning for something great on paper that looks like it's going to be a fantastic way of doing something, but you haven't really thought through, okay, well, how do we maintain this? How do we actually make this work in the real world? If you're making those plans in tandem, well, how are we? Okay, well, let's move it a little bit further forward here. Let's say we're working on, purchase orders being, or purchase requisitions being cut into POs. What does that system actually look like? And we say, well, the system will send it to this person. And if that, just a simple example, if that person doesn't recognize that they're the next in the chain, and you're just going to get a bunch of these requests that get stacked up somewhere in the system. So when you're thinking about changing into a digital footprint, understanding that when you trigger this piece, it's going to trigger this piece, and that person needs to know about it. So kind of interweaving that real world outworking with the digital framework that you're building, it will just help you downstream to understand when you pulled a trigger or when you pulled a lever and something's not working, you could go back to that maintenance plan, that system of review, and say, this is the drop. We saw 50 different requisitions lined up here, and nobody was doing anything with them. Oh yeah, well, we forgot to tell them, like, that's where they need to look for it in the system, something like that. So we're talking about system audits. A lot of the times your digital systems will have triggers, or they'll have alerts that will go off if you have something that's late. Being able to understand how your system works that way, if it's a digital footprint or digital framework, and saying, oh, we can put an automated system in here that'll ping us when we've got 10 requests stacked in a certain part of the digital framework. So understanding a little bit of that, putting in those key pieces and those reviews, and then making sure you're scheduling those reviews. It can help to reduce those redundancies unless you actually need a redundancy, which again, redundancies often equate to waste. Sometimes that's true. Sometimes I think redundancies can help you catch, especially in those key specific areas that might really impact your operation. So, when you need them, you got them. But with a good digital system, you can say, you know what? Oh man, we have this catch right here, but it's not catching everything, or we're not maybe monitoring it as closely. Let's put in something else downstream that will ping us within this digital framework, and it'll send us an automatic email or whatnot to say, hey, you need to check this out. It's not getting done the way that the system should be. Again, you got a systems framework, you go back, you fix the system, you make your tweaks, and you go along ahead, and your workforce can recognize what you've done because it's been communicated and it's documented and all that good stuff. So yeah, so what it also does is it allows you to look out into potential issues and mitigate disruptions as well. So this is kind of that ideology that we had, I think, in the first section, where it was talking about being a constant learner. And this is something I'll hit for the geopolitical events. This is really big for your supply chain person, whoever's wearing that hat within your organization, being able to understand what's happening within the world, even as a portion of their job. I know it's so easy to put on our blinders and say, I got 40 different things, I got 80 different things today. I've got to just get all this work through. And you do that day after day after day. And you might forget to think about, well, wait a minute, we're working in time and space, especially if we're a worldwide company, or if you're a global company, you have a global supply chain. But even if it's local, it's as simple as keeping your eye on the weather. If there's a big ice storm coming and you're supposed to be getting some Crosby clips in so that you can, jack up an engine out of your crate or whatever. And you get a major ice storm, that could delay your delivery of your clips. It could delay your delivery of whatever it is you're looking for. So just kind of being able to weave that in and saying, all right, what happens if, as a supply chain person, excuse me, how do I communicate that? Again, not going to go in depth there, because we went in depth in the second and the third series session of the series. So go back and think about things like that, and looking at your framework for what you've already built, your system, what you've built, and then weaving in some more of the digital things. Like, you can have alerts that go off for a lot of these things, and a lot of tools now that are built specifically for global supply chain people. For what regions of the world do you have material coming in from? Okay, that's just an example of what you can use some of these tools for. And I would encourage you to go out. There's a lot of them on the books. There's a lot of them in the world, but there's systems that will help you with this too. You can weave in, okay, I've got materials coming from New Zealand, and I've got materials coming in from Canada. I need you to kind of collate a news feed for me that'll tell me what's happening with transportation from those regions into the U.S. at the border, things like that. You know what? Something comes up at the border. Tariffs. That's another big one that I know is hitting a lot of folks right now. What happens? What are the thought processes on these? What do I need to be doing to set myself up for success? There are systems out in the world that will send that feed directly to whoever's wearing that supply chain hat, that will directly impact your specific areas that you need to know about. Again, won't go into much more detail there, but it's just a way that you can set up a system of getting you that information, so that you might not just be scattershot on the Google, feed, and hoping that something good comes across there that'll help you be informed about, what you need to know in your supply chain hat, supply chain seat for your specific operation. Something to think about there. And that's just, again, it's a bit of a redundancy. It's a bit of a maintenance program, but it's putting that system together that works for what you need when you need it. So great. Yeah, I got a little homework for the folks on here today on the action item at the very bottom. I do like to leave at least one piece of homework. I try to with my webinars. I know most of them are just me kind of sitting up here chatting, but this is one that you can do, and it's something very simple you can do today in your operation, whether you are the owner of a company, if you're just a consultant, maybe in a company, or whatever you're doing, within your day to day at your work, especially the manufacturing folks that we have on the call today. I'm sure you can pick these things out. So one is just I encourage you to run out into your operation in your supply chain group or whoever it might be, and find one person that might be or one person who has a lot of pull or importance within your system, and determine whether or not they're able to pull what they do together into a scoping, and not just be person centered, but be system centered. So what I'll say is, it's kind of a 4-step quick process. You just determine this person's scoping. If that person that is integral, and they might not have a ton of documentation, no value judgment on them. Again, it could just be you've exploded in business, or it's just kind of grown into this. But find that one key person, find out what their scoping is, all the areas that they touch and all their responsibilities and all that good stuff. Just kind of talk to them, find out what it is, find out what their scoping is. I do purchase orders, and then I send them to here. And then when I get them back, I do this with them. And kind of find those areas that make that go. Second is document the critical tasks. And you can say, filling up the printer paper isn't a critical task. Maybe, maybe it is, who knows? Maybe if you're sending POs out through the mail, that very well could be a critical task. But, find those critical tasks where you say, listen, it's not going to go forward, or we're going to have major detrimental impact if we don't have this document, or if this doesn't get done. Find those critical tasks and document them. Just how do they do it? What do they do? Who do they talk to? Who's involved? All that good stuff. Third, workflow mapping. And so it's taking those critical tasks as nodes on your workflow map, and say, all right, these things have to get done within the course of a day, week, month, year, whatever. And then what are the other items that are done that keep everything moving smoothly within this person's scope, and adding those into that workflow. Well, this has to knock this domino over, that has to knock that domino over. And I will kind of harp a little bit on the workflow mapping, because that's going to come up in the next 3 slides. So that's a pretty important piece. It might not seem as, well, why do I need to do that? But I'll explain here in just a second why I would encourage you to do that as you move forward in your business. So then automation or systematization of what they do. So if you can systematically do it, if you can put in an automated thing, even if it's an Excel spreadsheet, where you do, an automated pivot table or a Power BI table that you go through, and you can automate a little bit of something for them. It's looking for those opportunities. What are these menial tasks that somebody might be doing that could be automated? And think through, if you know about what Excel can do, Power BI can do, and then again, if AI and whatnot, and we'll talk about that here in a second. But if you know what it can do, start, looking at people's taskings through the lens of, does this have the opportunity to be offloaded? Like, this might take a lot of their time, and could this be automated a little bit? Again, it might not be necessarily worth it. Like the juice might not be worth the squeeze, but you might very well find, man, I could reduce 20% of their menial tasks and give them more of the bandwidth back to go and do some of these key items that maybe take a little longer. So it's just all about reducing, streamlining, and making things a little bit easier. All right. So moving forward, and this is keeping an eye on technology. So now this is where we're going to start talking about maybe future state. And I don't want to make this like some space age Jetsons, you're going to put on a virtual helmet and, just scream out taskings and everything's just going to get done for you. I think that may happen at some point in the future. I'm not going to lie about it, but it's not there yet, right? We're not quite there yet. And most of us may still be in this stage of learning about what this is. What is artificial intelligence? What is machine learning? What is going on in the world of robotics? And I will say that it is exciting and a little bit scary for me as I've been digging into this. So I've been doing a pretty deep dive on artificial intelligence for about the past 1.5 to 2 years, and trying to learn about what's coming down the pipeline. I was very much involved in a digital footprint or digital thread implementation in a manufacturing facility. And so we started hearing about AI, even though it's been around for quite some time. In fact, my first experience with it, I won't go into detail, was about 10, 15 years ago, starting to think through it when I was in intelligence in the military. So started hearing about it then, started getting interested in it, and to see where it's come, even in 10 years, we'll say, even where, gosh, in 10 months, in 10 minutes almost, it's really developing quickly. So I know it's overwhelming. It's very easy to say, I'm going to keep on doing what I'm doing, and I'll wait for it all to pan out. And that's okay. Keeping, I would encourage knowledge, just gaining knowledge. I'll say that right up front. None of this will be saying, hey, you person on the call, you've got to jump in and you've got to grab every digital tool, every AI tool, machine learning and the robotics and the whole thing. You better be doing it. I'm not going to say that because it might not fit your operation, what is needed right now for you. However, I would greatly encourage education, just learning about what's happening now. And I would say, yeah, it's really hard to find a lot of documents online that are written out, books and whatnot, that frame out what's happening today. So my encouragement for most is to go on, YouTube, Rumble, these different apps, finding podcasts and things where people are talking about what's happening in the world of manufacturing, specifically supply chain for our purposes. But there's a lot that's happening there with augmentation and supporting the taskings that happen in these fields. So again, what could this look like moving forward, and how could we use it just today? It's as simple as saying, how do you frame out how much time do you spend communicating in terms of emails with your suppliers? How could it clean up some of the language? Going back to a couple to last week, we have I kind of stressed the importance of the types of communication you're having with your vendors and making sure it's clean and appropriate and clear, and you're really getting to the heart. You can jump in right now to like Grok 3 is an example of artificial intelligence support. Chat GPT is a very common one. There's a lot that are out there. DeepSeek, I won't say which ones are my favorite or not my favorite, but researching which ones that you might like. I have to say that I do spend probably historically more time in Chat GPT just myself, but you can jump in there and ask it some questions on how to solidify your language a little bit, how to clean it up, how to make it clear. Is this clear? If I was going to send this to a vendor, what would you say is the key points of this message? And it'll tell you in 10 seconds exactly what you want to hear or back. And you can tweak your original message, or you could say, hey, I really want that message to say something cleaner. I want it to get this point across. And it'll write it right there for you. So just little things like that you can do today, if you so choose. And again, if it's in line with your legal, if it's in line with all of the regulations that you have, again, there's a security element to it as well, and that's one of the things that's a little scary. But thinking through what is available, what can you do, and just keeping a depth, like understanding and learning and growing in your knowledge of what's out there. Some of the things that this will be, I will see this certainly helping within the factory or within the supply chain operation, is inventory management systems, being able to know exactly where your things are at all times, when they got here, when it's out, first in, first out, type of usage for your product coming in. Vendor evaluations, being able to have an AI look at your data and say, tell me all these vendor insights, anything you want to know, which one's the ones that's always on time, which ones aren't on time, which all that. It'll be seconds away, as opposed to historically, having to pull that data, having to put it into an Excel spreadsheet, having to have it jive correctly with your MRP system or whatever that might look like. That those issues are being addressed currently, and the products that are coming out are absolutely amazing. So again, just a plug for the training and learning and growing and understanding what is on the market right now, how it could help your specific operation, and keeping adept. One of the things I mentioned earlier was agentic AI, and so agentic AI is just essentially, think of it as an AI worker that's very focused on one specific tasking, but they do it fantastically, and they have all the tools that they need to do that thing. Writing emails, for instance, you can have an agent that writes all your emails for you, and it can talk to other agents. So you might have an agent that sits on top of a group of agents that gives them orders to do. So if you say, I need X, Y, and Z done, it'll go through and it'll put those sub agents to work. It'll send all that information out. It'll gather all that information back. It'll write up your emails, and it'll automatically send it to your customers or to your vendors or whatever you might need it for. It'll write or it could review your purchase orders to make sure everything's on them correctly. It will review your contracts to make sure, you know, the data is correct. Again, within the frameworks of legality, I would say you want to definitely keep that. I can't preach that enough either. You don't want to let your proprietary information slip or anything like that. So being very cautious, but also understanding like what it is out there for you, what it could do, is really important. So I would encourage looking into it. You got algorithms that are being created in for automation, robotics. I would say, from my perspective, and I could be convinced otherwise on this, but I'd say that's probably your next big wave of increase in and supports for businesses like what we have in manufacturing. So robotics, I mean, it's nothing new. It's been around for a long time, but I would say the coupling of robotics with the AI framework will be exciting to see how it impacts, something that you could look into as well. I know that there's a lot of integrations that are being developed right now by many companies across the board. So if you're in a heavily robotic factory right now, looking into, integrations and what that might look like for your robotics and how they get their marching orders a little bit more cleanly based off of real world data, real time data. Decision making, of course, too. I won't go into detail here, but I'm sure you can kind of, again, going back to, the weather events, geopolitical issues, mentioned it on the last slide. That's something that can be helped as well, not just as a standard, let's say, a data pool for your supply chain person, but actually taking that data, crunching it into what that means for your operation based off of how your operation is running and exactly how it's going to play out for you, or potentially could play out for you if you don't make changes, or even suggesting those changes. Well, this is happening in this part of the world. You need this part by X, Y, and Z date. However, you can change your manufacturing, to accommodate that. You can do this part of your build second, do this part of your build first, and by the time you get to that second part of your build, your material will be here because that should have been relieved, whatever that might look like. But it's happening. Like that stuff is not futuristic anymore. It's here. So, learning how that might be able to help you, extremely important. I won't go in too much into the local impact or global impact. I'm sure you can see those and determine on your own step. So if you're not a global manufacturer right now, you may be in the future. I would say, hey, the time is now. Looking into it, seeing if you might be able to be positioned to go global. The time has never been, I would say, never been easier for determining how you can pivot in that direction if you so determine. Again, I see the wisdom also in staying with what you got. So I'm not making any any pushes in any direction, but the support system that you have in place in the world right now is really good digitally and just with people and organizations as well. So if that's something that's on your radar, you might want to consider it. All right, let's go into blockchain and distributed ledger technology. So this is a little futuristic, even though blockchain, again, it's been around for a while. We've got some digital coinage that has been, piggybacked off of blockchain. I am by no means an expert in blockchain, and so I'm going to kind of just give a brief about this, about some things that could potentially impact your organization, and how it can help, especially in like the supply chain world. If you're sitting there and wearing your supply chain hat, my biggest thing I think that I've seen that this could be helpful for is fraud prevention and making sure, especially if you have government contracts, for instance, and you have to source your materials through approved and appropriate chains. Blockchain technology can actually support that by reducing that ability to be counterfeited, and it can check at different levels of delivery and whatnot, where that the handshakes have to happen a certain way, with your technology specifically, or with your technological data, or your data systems that are behind the scenes, or your intellectual products. Uh, you can wrap it in basically a digital security system, which is, your blockchain, and give it that layer of protection where, there's a prescribed notion of who owns the ledger for that material, who's touched it, who's whatever. And you can only get into it if you're, kind of that prescribed person. So again, this technology is extremely interesting. It's extremely efficient. It can create some of the digital ledger technology can create smart contracts. That's something to look into. All of these, again, I'm not going to be the expert on this specific, but I would say, if you're in the intellectual property field and you need some extra security or support there, looking into how you can wrap it in some sort of a digital blockchain or distribution DLT might very well be the ticket that you've been looking for. So I would encourage looking into the technology itself, looking into how you can use these type of things for security purposes and whatnot, and to reduce your turnaround times, your order fulfillment, your paperwork and things by creating that direct handshake that makes it more possible and more secure. Yeah, again, it has definite local impact and definite global and impact as well. So lots of good things that are happening with those technologies. Um, So I'm kind of moving through a little bit quicker now because I do want to leave a few minutes at the tail end for questions because I'm hoping we'll get some today. So if you're thinking of any questions, uh, get ready. We got one more slide here, and after this one, we'll open it up for some questions. But so this is another big one in our world, especially folks who have, as I was talking about a little bit ago, in those very heavy robotics based manufacturing facilities. The Internet of Things, I'm sure, is something that is at least a terminology that you've heard before, or maybe you haven't, but here we go. Excuse me. Going too fast. There we go. So for the Internet of Things and advanced sensor technology, this is extremely exciting. So for me, I'm a big tech geek. I love the stuff. I love the technology. If you can tell, I get very animated when I talk about it. But I love the fact that real-time monitoring is a thing with Internet of Things. This was talking about earlier, setting in Portugal, on your computer and being able to look and track goods and monitors. Some of these real-time technologies for these Internet of Things, that's what will help you be able to do that. Having landing pages or landing spots for your digital footprint will allow you to jump in and see how that factory is working. You have also the idea of a digital twin or a digital factory that's outside of the actual physical factory that can be built off of this technology. And you can go in and you can tweak and you can have sandboxes on what happens if type questions. If I throw this in here, if I increase or ramp up, or if I ramp down, and all those good things, what will that do to my factory? So the Internet of Things makes this possible. When you have this sensor technology that allows you to check, what's moving across your manufacturing, equipment, and being able to pull that data into a centralized location and determine how things affect other things. I mean, the opportunity for an advancement within our quality organization, for instance, being able to, to understand when we have this machine is off way down the line, and then we get a quality issue, 10 machines later, making that connection because the data is speaking to each other. Those type of things, again, getting it to talk nicely together and doing all that is a difficult, somewhat of a difficult opportunity, we'll say, to solve. But when you do it, the outworking can be fantastic. So again, I'm not championing any of these specifically for your organization, but what I'm trying to do is say, like, open there. This may be a mind opening, or you might know about all this, which is great. But it's trying to get that ideology and saying, hey, maybe we don't have to always do things the same way we did, and where do we want to position, how do we want to position ourselves for the future? So getting involved in these discussions about the Internet of Things or about AI and how they work together. And again, all of this stuff's going to work together too. So once you get your digital factory and it's all connected in, and you connect it into your AI tools, as well as your humanoid robots that are coming, in a blink of an eye, it'll be here. How do you make all these things work together nicely, to create these efficiencies? We're living in that world now. It's happening. There's many companies that are developing these, and so at least, again, really at this point, um, looking into the crystal ball a bit, saying, where are we going with these? These are my perspectives. They're very educated guesses, I would say, as to what we're going to see. And my hope is that you'll just take this information and say, yeah, you know what, we might not quite be there, but at least get you thinking on some of the footprint that you can start creating now. This digital development, again, going back to the beginning of the discussion, creating a little bit of that digital framework right now creates those handshakes, right? You might not be ready for the Internet of Things today, or that digital framework for all things AI, but if you can start moving your paper into Excel, and start moving your Excel into Teams to use as a collective tool, and then building some automated pivot tables, and then ingesting those into another tool that displays them in a different way, and then taking that information and using it in an AI system, the outworking, and saying, how can we do this better based off of what information you're seeing? And then using that to go back into your digital footprint out on your manufacturing floor and saying, when you see this, AI, automatically, agent, tell your machines out there to adjust in these ways. And you can start to say, oh, well, I've learned this AI system. I've learned anytime we do these, and I can start doing this in an automated way. I can start to see this coming down the pipe, and then I can start to predict that happening. And so I can make these adjustments as I'm learning how the stream of impact hits me at a certain level. And so again, it all starts somewhere, and it starts with a digital footprint. And so again, if you're there, great. If you're not, that's great too. And with that, I'll kind of shut up and send it back over to Dave and see if there's if there's any questions. I didn't hit a lot of this on this one, but at least I hopefully gave the idea of what the Internet of Things is.
Yeah, thanks, Adam. If anybody has any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat and we'll ask Adam. In the meantime, this is a lot of interesting stuff, Adam. Where we're going with this Industry 4.0 and the next evolution of that.
Mm-hmm.
If I'm a small shop with 10 or 15 people and I'm interested in this stuff, but it's overwhelming, where would you suggest somebody start? I know you talked a lot about data. You were just talking about creating pivot tables and some other things. Is that where you would start, or would you start at maybe looking at your processes to make sure they're standardized enough that those tools can work for you?
What I would say personally is that creating and we're not going to have perfect factories. Nothing's going to be perfect, but creating the best flow process map that you can, and understanding what you're doing and how you're doing it, and being able to document that, that's the place to start for sure, because it makes all the other stuff easy. Yeah, that's the back end. That's the footprint. That is the foundation of it all. Because there's no real way to go through and say, hey, Chat GPT, make my factory better. And it's going to say, okay, I will. How do you want me to do that? And you're going to have to feed it some data. You're going to have to give it something. So if you give it that footprint, and you can help with those flows, and I mentioned the flow, and I didn't go in depth on it, but if you can have a footprint of those flows, you can start to create those agents yourself. There's a many no code options of creating agents that will ingest that flow that you've documented and say, oh, well, if I need this to do this, and I need this domino to be knocked over, then I can just tell this agent to do those knocking over those dominoes on its own. And that's the foundation, but you have to know where the dominoes are set first. So yeah, absolutely. I think it's just documenting what you got, building that system of systems and documenting it. That's your framework. Then you can start to all the fun digital talk that I just spewed about.
Yeah, process mapping is something I've always been a big fan of in CI, because to me, it's the baseline. You can look at that and decide where your headaches are, where your opportunities are, and where you're doing really well, and maybe try to replicate that elsewhere.
For sure.
Yeah, I've talked to a lot of companies who say, hey, I was just reading about 3D or cobots. How do I use one? Well, that's a good question. We should probably ask some other questions first.
Yeah.
Speaking of questions, we got one here from Matt Henderson. If you're a smaller shop, where do you go? How do you push back or emphasize that this is relative to any company, no matter your size?
What I've found is, and again, I'm going to caveat this with, you really need to know your security footprint as well. Before you start implementing any sort of digital, you need to have a good understanding. So the first step, again, like we were just talking about, is just having the processes in place, understanding that. The second step is like saying, all right, if we want to dream big and implement some of the stuff, who owns your data security? And start talking to that person. And then what I would say is, once you have that in place as a foundation, and again, I'm no lawyer and I'm no expert on that world, but once you understand what you have the potential capabilities of doing, I would say a lot of pilot work is really impactful, because you can tell somebody how good it's going to be, but when you show them, look at what I did with this email, let's say. I mean, and it could be as simple as that. I need to tell this customer X, Y, and Z. And I wrote out this big, long email about it, and it just seems clunky to me. If you can show the people in charge, if you're talking about like pushback in terms of where within your scoping, I would say start where you are. Hey, have you seen this? Check out what this can do. You can even check, like what I've done personally is said, hey, look at what I do with my own personal email. Check this out. Like, I can just feed this in the Chat GPT, and boom, this email looks amazing, and I'll send it off to a friend or to whatever, or to the wife, because I want to make sure that I got all the right information to make sure that she, has what she needs. So things like that. And just, having during those regular conversations, if it's you and your manager, just being like, man, have you heard about this? Have you seen what this can do? It's amazing. You start building up a little bit of interest in it, and then you give an example. Again, even if it's not directly related to the work you're trying to improve, slowly warm it, because there's going to be a lot of people who are not comfortable with this, and I get it. It is an uncomfortable technology. Digitization in general can be very uncomfortable. I don't want to learn how to use Excel. Well, yeah, I'm with you, but look at what this can do. So kind of learning a little bit about yourself, kind of doing that work on the outside, learning, what it can do, what's open, and then just feeding in that conversation, saying, "Hey, have we ever even thought about this?" Sometimes it's all kind of, it just takes one person to say, "Man, I've seen this work really well, and I think we could use it for some stuff." And you might just start with something as simple as an email chain, right? Using it for emails or using it in a very general way. And oftentimes that's the one stepping stone you need to get in place to the next stepping stone, to the next stepping stone. Again, with security in mind and with an understanding of what you're able to do, moving forward slowly and seeing what's out there, changing the hearts and minds one person at a time, maybe. But when you see it and you're like, yeah, gosh, this is going to be a major disruptor. We really need to do something about this. Just having those conversations, and oftentimes it's the pitch and how you do it, I would say too, a little bit matters. So it being encouraging about it and saying, man, this looks like it could be really, really useful, gets that buzz going. That's kind of what I've seen happen organically. But if you can kind of nudge it in that direction a little bit unorganically, that's probably a good way, at least to start. Hopefully that answers. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, thanks. That helps. The mistrust in technology is tough to overcome. I know Alexa is listening and watching everything I do. Very true.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's what I always say every time I give an AI speech. I'm like, I'm with you, AI. I'm on your team. It's me and AI together. Don't send the drones in my direction. I'm one of the good ones.
Um, one final question I'll ask, unless we have others in the chat that I don't see yet. Oh, here's another one. With AI being more and more relative in industry, how do we protect and make an argument for humans to still have a place in the workplace? I firmly
Oh,
believe we shouldn't get rid of human jobs, but AI and robotics provide much better throughput in many ways.
wow. Okay. I promise this wasn't a planted question. I'm actually writing a book. I'm getting ready to launch my own book on this exact subject. It should hopefully it'll be coming out by the end of this weekend, believe it or not, maybe next weekend. But it's yes, it's about the coding essentially of the AI framework. So I could go on and on and on and on and on and on and on about this, literally a book length. So I won't go super in depth here, but what I do hope for, at least in the framework of the book, and it's a philosophical book, it's not geared towards global supply chain. It's more philosophy and management based and societal based. But from my research and my hope, is that what we will see is a blossoming of other industries, and a move towards a creative. I would say, and this is total, just again, really looking deep into the crystal ball. What we're going to see is a movement towards the menial tasks being reduced and more creative decision-making tasks being elevated. So moving your way into those type of directions would be good. And then I think that there's going to be an element of society that will likely need or will just naturally adjust to being more abundance minded, because there will be so much support from a digitization and an AI support for these taskings that are going to be more automated. So I'm an opto realist is what I call myself. So I'm optimistic that we can see a lot of industries increase, including manufacturing. However, I think that, and again, no necessary plug for the book, but if you want to read at least what I think about it, it's coming out soon. So I'm an optimist, and I do think there will be augmentation. Um, I do think that there will be a drive in the near term, at least from my perspective. And again, I hope I'm wrong. There will be a drive to keep up with the Joneses and to reduce, a little bit. But I do think that the augmentation will be first. Will be, how do we use AI to augment? our jobs in our workforce, then I think that we will see a reduction necessarily. My hope is that we have a landing zone for the folks to expand into other industries that will be that will grow because of the AI that we see and robotics technology and development of robotics and whatnot, because they got to be built somewhere, right? And we need people who are very much in the manufacturing world right now that wear those hats to understand how we build these facilities that are going to build these robots that are going to build the, all the stuff. So I think we could
Adam,
be setting pretty.
what was the name of the book again?
It's called The Morality Code.
Okay.
It's called The Morality Code, and it's got a subtitle. I don't have it right here in front of me, but it's by Adam Lowe. It's called The Morality Code. Hopefully, it'll be out Sunday on Amazon.
Cool.
Yeah,
I had no idea amongst everything else you were writing a book on top of it. Do you sleep?
not as much as I should. I'm gonna write a book about that, and it's just gonna be all Z's, and I'm not gonna sell any copies. But no, yeah, I'm excited about that. I actually have two books in the works, and the other one's a management book, so it'll be coming
Nice.
out in a few months.
We're right at 1 o'clock. I do want to add a comment to the question that was just asked. We talk about this a lot in the MEP National Network. What does that trend look like when we get more involved with robotics, AI, the digital factories, and everything? And you hit the nail on the head. I think we're going to see a massive overuse of all these technologies.
Yep.
It's just like anything new. It's the new flashy thing. Let's see what we can do with this. And you're going to find that there are tasks and roles where AI, robotics, everything is super helpful.
Yep.
And then you're going to find out it's more of a pain than it is. The juice isn't worth the squeeze. So there's going to be those jobs that still need that human touch.
Yep.
But it's also, I think it's going to open up a whole new class of jobs to manage those tools.
Yep.
You're going to need people to maintain the robots or the cobots that you use. You're going to need people to mine the data that AI brings to you or create the queries for it. So I think it's going to be this isn't the right way to name it, but I feel like it's going to be another industrial revolution at some point.
Yeah.
What is, once we have these tools, what's the new workforce look like? What do the new work roles look like?
Yep. Yeah, my optorealist side says it could lead to a more fulfilling workplace and doing more of those taskings that we enjoy and less of the menial emails and all that kind of stuff that can be automated a little bit more easily, but those ones that require the humanity to do the brain work and make the decisions and ask the queries and that. Yeah. So I'm hopeful, cautiously optimistic and an opto-realist, but yeah, I like where your head's at.
I don't want to run us over. Like I said in the past, Adam and I can talk about this stuff for hours on end, and it's probably not nearly as exciting to everybody else as it is the two of us. But Adam, thank you so much for this series. All 4 of these webinars have been fantastic. Tracy will be sending out information on this, on where to find them if you haven't seen the others, or if you want to look at the series that we did last year, which is more of a high-level supply chain 101. Again, I'd like to thank everybody that attended. And I think the closing note that I would leave on is a lot of this stuff might not make sense to you. It might seem way too big for your company or operation, but all this is scalable. And it's like everything else, there are bits and pieces that'll make sense. And the other thing to think about is while you might not see a need for it immediately in your business, think about the companies you want to work with, the supply chains you want to become part of. What are they asking for? Because in some cases, employing some of these things and some of these tools and practices could put you at a competitive advantage over somebody who hasn't. So if you have any questions, reach out to us. Tracy will have my information in the follow-up emails, and I'm sure she can put Adam's in there along with the book. Other than that, thank you all for joining us for these, and hope you enjoy the rest of your afternoon.
Yes. Thanks.